Johnny Carson held America's most powerful TV throne for 30 years, witnessing the darkest sides of Hollywood's brightest stars. In recently uncovered private journals, Carson documented the monsters hiding behind Hollywood's glamorous masks. These weren't just difficult guests. They were demons in disguise who made Carson shudder backstage. Which beloved icon did he call truly hateful? Marlon Brando. When people think of Marlon Brando, they recall the calm, powerful Don Corleone in The Godfather. But Johnny Carson could never forget the completely different Brando he witnessed behind closed doors. Behind those eyes isn't wisdom, it's cruelty, Carson once stated at a private gathering. Brando had at least 11 children from various relationships, but instead of providing a loving home, his house was described as a battlefield. His daughter Cheyenne bitterly confessed in a Tahiti interview, "I never had a father. I just had a selfish man that the whole world worshipped." The true horror emerged when Christian Brando, Marlon's son, shot and killed Cheyenne's boyfriend in their Los Angeles mansion in 1990. The press labeled it a blood-stained dynasty. Christian went to prison while Cheyenne plunged into depression and committed suicide at just 25 years old. Carson believed the root of this tragic family chaos was Brando himself, an irresponsible father who created what he called a family from hell. But Brando's cruelty extended beyond his children. He was infamous for a chaotic romantic life that Carson called perverse, using his power to manipulate countless women. An actress told The Hollywood Reporter, "He would promise me a role and the next morning he'd act like he didn't know me." Many accused Brando of violence, with one woman saying, "He would charm you with a smile, but when he got angry, he was a beast." The industry whispered about Brando's ledger of lust and his notorious casting couch. Carson once bitterly remarked at a party, "Audiences remember The Godfather. I only remember a father who drove his daughter to suicide." Joan Crawford. Johnny Carson once recalled at a private Beverly Hills party in 1973, when mentioning Joan Crawford, he slowly took a drag from his cigarette, gazed into the distance and said, "I've met a lot of unpleasant people, but I've never seen a woman who turned into a demon the moment she stepped off the stage like that." On The Tonight Show, Crawford walked out like a queen in a floor-sweeping gown with glittering jewelry and a sophisticated smile that captivated the audience. Carson would even bow to her. But backstage, the mask dropped instantly. People still remember an incident from 1965 when an assistant brought her ice that wasn't cold enough. Without warning, Crawford grabbed the glass and smashed it against the wall. Shards flew, hitting the young woman who burst into tears and fled. Seconds later, Crawford calmly checked her reflection, reapplied her lipstick, and walked out smiling, charmingly like nothing had happened. What truly horrified Carson wasn't just Crawford's treatment of staff, but how she tormented her own adopted children. She had four: Christina, Christopher, and twins Kathy and Cindy. The world believed Crawford was a wonderful mother. A 1947 Life magazine cover showed her radiantly smiling while hugging the children. But it was all a calculated performance. The horrific truth was revealed in Christina's 1978 memoir, Mommy Dearest, which shocked America. Christina recounted being regularly beaten with wire hangers, while Christopher was tied to his bed to learn obedience at just 7 years old. Carson, typically discreet, confessed to friends, "A mother who can turn her children into prisoners, who can use the guise of love to torment them, is more wicked than any villain on screen." Frank Sinatra. People remember Frank Sinatra as a legendary singer, old blue eyes who melted millions of hearts. But Carson once sighed and told friends at a Malibu party that his sweet voice was just a facade. Behind it was a vicious demon who loved to bully and threaten others. Sinatra had a disturbing habit. He loved proving his power by humiliating others. He never saw staff as people. A simple reminder like 3 minutes to air was enough for him to lunge forward, grab someone by the collar, and snarl, "You want to lose your job right now?" The floor manager, a World War II veteran, would tremble and run away. The entire set would hold its breath because everyone knew that messing with Sinatra was like messing with the mafia. Carson witnessed Sinatra's true nature firsthand during a 1976 Tonight Show appearance. Rather than following the usual interview format, Sinatra essentially took over, dictating topics, interrupting Carson repeatedly, and even asking Carson questions instead of answering them. For Carson, who prided himself on controlling his show, this was deeply uncomfortable. Though maintaining his professional demeanor, viewers familiar with Carson's subtle cues could see his growing irritation in his tightened smile and forced laughter. What made Sinatra particularly intimidating was his well-known mafia connections. His relationship with the underworld reportedly began when he accumulated gambling debts in Vegas that were paid off by mob boss Sam Giancana. The price was performing at mafia-controlled venues to launder money. Young singers said Sinatra would invite them on tour, promising fame, but they would receive such paltry pay they couldn't even cover hotel costs. A musician once warned, "If you dare to argue, someone will knock on your hotel room door that night." Johnny Carson, usually restrained, couldn't hide his disgust. He once told Ed McMahon, "People hear him sing and think he's an angel. I sat next to him and learned he was a demon in a suit with an entire army of darkness behind him." Shelley Winters. When people mention Shelley Winters, the public thinks of a talented actress who won 2 Oscars. But Johnny Carson saw her as a chaos maker, a demon who enjoyed the pain and embarrassment of others. On the Tonight Show stage, Carson witnessed Winters transform the atmosphere in minutes. From a harmless question like, "How have you been lately?" she would immediately turn it into an opportunity to attack the world. She would yell about the hypocrisy of men and corrupt politicians, even dragging colleagues' names into the conversation and exposing their secret affairs in front of a stunned audience. For Carson, it was no longer an interview, but a public execution. Winters became infamous among the show's staff for her inability to adapt to the light, entertainment-focused format of late-night television. Rather than sharing amusing anecdotes, she would launch into intense political diatribes or deeply personal revelations that left Carson visibly uncomfortable. During one appearance in the mid-1970s, what began as a simple question about a recent film quickly evolved into Winters delivering a 5-minute uninterrupted monologue about government corruption, leaving Carson struggling to transition to a commercial. Her violent temper made things worse. Many backstage staff recalled that before a taping, they had to hide all cups, vases, and anything that could become a weapon in Winters' hands. A TV director once said, "We weren't afraid she would walk out. We were afraid she would throw something at someone." That fear wasn't unfounded. On British television, Winters once threw a glass of wine directly at actor Oliver Reed, then calmly said, "I did it because I wanted to." The main reason Winters was hated by Carson and much of Hollywood was her endless chain of scandalous affairs. She was notorious for creating love triangles that shattered families and careers. When the scandals broke, Winters just laughed haughtily in the newspapers. "Weak men lose their wives. Don't blame me," Carson once said bluntly after a taping. "Some people try to make the audience laugh. Others try to make them cry. Shelley is different. She makes the entire set feel humiliated." Orson Welles. Johnny Carson once confessed to a Los Angeles Times reporter in 1975, Orson Welles wasn't a guest. He walked in like the whole Tonight Show belonged to him. Indeed, on television, Welles was a storytelling genius with a resounding, powerful voice capable of mesmerizing an audience. But Carson saw an arrogant emperor who looked down on everyone. People remember a 1970 taping where Welles casually tore up Carson's prepared questions in front of the crew, then sat for over 20 minutes giving a monologue while ignoring the cutoff signal. Carson tried to interject a few sentences but was brushed aside. At one point, Welles even ordered a cameraman to change the angle live on air, treating Carson as nothing more than a decoration. According to Tonight Show writers, Welles routinely dismissed any prepared questions Carson's team had developed. "He told us our questions were pedestrian and obvious," one former writer recalled. "He literally crossed them all out and handed back an empty page." This put Carson in the uncomfortable position of having to interview one of cinema's most significant figures with no preparation. Behind that glamorous facade was a private life that sent chills down many people's spines. Welles had 3 daughters, Christopher, Rebecca, and Beatrice. But anyone who knew them would say those children grew up abandoned by their father. Christopher and Rebecca barely saw him, and Beatrice later bitterly remarked that he cared more about his fleeting lovers than his daughters. Wells's love life truly painted the portrait of what Carson called a monster disguised as a genius. After leaving his first wife, Virginia Nicholson, he married Rita Hayworth, the hottest star in Hollywood at the time. Their 1943 wedding was hailed by Life magazine as America's dream wedding. But that marriage quickly turned into a tragedy. Wells openly cheated, abandoning Hayworth and their daughter Rebecca. What Carson hated most was Wells's contemptuous attitude toward others. He once complained to Ed McMahon backstage, "At least the fakes know how to hide it." Wells doesn't. He despises everyone from the staff to the audience. To him, only Orson Welles is worthy of being heard. Jane Russell. Jane Russell was once the archetype of the woman Hollywood wanted to sell to the world. Seductive, fiery, with sharp eyes and a body that captivated millions. Howard Hughes spent millions to make films that celebrated her curves, turning Russell into a sex symbol of the 1940s. But Johnny Carson never remembered her with admiration. In his memory, Jane Russell appeared as a demon disguised as a goddess, who used bigotry, religious extremism, and hypocrisy to torment others. The Tonight Show backstage witnessed scenes that staff were afraid to discuss. A gay makeup artist once lightly touched Russell's hair to fix it, and she immediately pulled away and shouted, "You pervert! Don't let your demon-possessed kind touch me." The employee ran away crying while Russell calmly sat down, adjusted her dress, and smiled charmingly at the camera as if nothing had happened. Her bigotry wasn't limited to words. Once Russell demanded the crew bring a pastor to cleanse the makeup room just because a lighting technician was openly gay. She declared, "If you don't exorcise this room, I will not step foot in it." Carson saw the issue plainly. That's not faith. That's cruelty disguised as righteousness. On The Tonight Show, Russell went even further. When Carson arranged for her to sit next to beloved star Rock Hudson, Russell coldly said in front of the audience, "I'm not sitting next to that fake man." The comment aimed directly at Hudson's sexuality made Carson blush, Hudson freeze, and the audience gasp. For a national entertainment show, that act was nothing short of a public stabbing. Russell didn't only target gay people. She openly opposed the civil rights movement of the 1960s, mocking black people and calling equality laws a joke. Some colleagues said she had refused to sign contracts if the crew had a black member, forcing studios to replace them. A black actress told Ebony magazine, "Jane Russell made us feel like we weren't human." Johnny Carson ultimately removed Jane Russell from the guest list. He told his crew at a meeting, "I don't pay anyone to come here and humiliate my staff. The audience comes to laugh, not to witness contempt." Bette Davis. When people mention Bette Davis, American audiences from the 1940s and 50s immediately think of an icon. Her sharp eyes were immortalized in the song Bette Davis Eyes. On the Tonight Show stage, Davis was always the center of attention. Intelligent, sharp, and every word made the audience laugh. Johnny Carson once admitted no one could deliver a quick jab better than Bette. But he also knew that behind the smile the audience admired hid another person. Foul-mouthed, bitter, and even cruel to her own family. Backstage, Carson once witnessed Davis down a glass of brandy and then turned to berate a cue card operator. "Can't you read?" Even an animal couldn't read a cue card held that crookedly. The entire crew froze, and only Carson managed a forced smile to diffuse the situation. It wasn't the only time she took her anger out on others. Makeup artists, servers, and even fellow guests could become targets when she felt overshadowed. But the most horrifying things Davis did weren't on set, but in her own home. She had 4 children, Barbara known as BD, Margot Merrill, who had an intellectual disability, and 2 adopted boys, Michael and a second Margot. To the public, Davis's appearance on the cover of Life magazine with her children made her seem like a devoted mother, but the truth was the exact opposite. In her 1985 memoir, My Mother's Keeper, Barbara described her childhood as a series of endless trials, with her mother as the judge. She never received love, only insults. Davis controlled every small detail from the dresses her daughter wore to her sleep schedule. Once, just because Barbara dared to talk back, she locked her in a dark room for hours, ignoring her cries that echoed throughout the mansion. The most painful case was Margot, the adopted daughter with an intellectual disability. Instead of caring for her, Davis saw her as a burden and sent her to an institution at age 3. She almost never mentioned this daughter again, except when she needed to project the image of a sacrificing mother. Carson once said bitterly at a private dinner in Palm Springs, "I used to think she was just a sharp woman, but then I understood that she used bitterness as a weapon and turned her own children into victims." Mickey Rooney. Perhaps the most shocking name on Johnny Carson's blacklist was Mickey Rooney. He was no unknown. He was Hollywood's golden boy, a face tied to the childhood memories of an entire nation. The Andy Hardy film series from 1937 to 1946 made Rooney the #1 box office star, to the point that Time magazine called him America's youthful hero. But to Johnny Carson, who had to host Rooney on The Tonight Show many times, that image was just a shiny layer of paint covering a real monster. In the Burbank studio in the 1970s, Rooney would often show up drunk. One time he walked out with a wine-stained shirt and a crooked tie, then slumped into his chair and gave a vulgar laugh. Instead of sharing the sweet memories the audience expected, he began rambling about obscene stories, hinting at his sexual exploits, which left the entire room silent. Carson, a master at salvaging situations, had to swallow his anger that night. Backstage, Rooney was a nightmare for female staff. He had a habit of grabbing their arms, pulling them close, and making lewd comments. Some young women would burst into tears on the spot. Others would request to switch shifts to avoid him. Carson once had to apologize to an actress in her 20s because Rooney wouldn't stop harassing her, even while the cameras were rolling. But it didn't stop there. Within the industry, people whispered about even more frightening behavior: Rooney's frequent inappropriate conduct with teenage girls just starting in Hollywood. A few people said he would invite them under the pretense of tutoring, promising movie roles, then trapping them in difficult situations. The mainstream press remained silent because Rooney was an icon, but everyone in the industry whispered, "He's not just a drunk, he's also a predator." Outside the studio, Rooney's private life was equally chaotic. He had 9 children from 8 different marriages, but most grew up with a lack of love. The children said their father was often drunk, would beat their mothers, or would disappear into casinos. Tim Rooney once said in an interview, "My father was never there for us. We only remember the sound of arguments, crying, and the nights he came home drunk." Johnny Carson once exclaimed at a party in Palm Springs, "I had to sit there and pretend to smile at a man I knew had made women cry right off stage. No one deserves to be called a legend if they live so poorly." Zsa Zsa Gabor. In the public eye, Zsa Zsa Gabor was the embodiment of European glamour, blonde in a magnificent ball gown, her neck dripping with dazzling diamonds. Every time she stepped onto the stage of The Tonight Show, the audience was captivated by her brilliance. But Johnny Carson, who had to face Gabor multiple times, knew the harsh truth. Beneath the makeup was an ambitious and ruthless woman who treated the entire world as a tool for her power games. From the moment she set foot in Hollywood, Gabor saw marriage as a form of investment. She married not for love, but to climb higher. She had a total of 9 husbands, from wealthy businessmen and European princes to oil millionaires. The Los Angeles Times once wrote, "Each of Zsa's marriages was like a transaction. She put love in the contract and walked away with villas, luxury cars, and diamonds." One of her ex-husbands admitted bitterly, "She got to know me just so she could have all my assets." The reason she went through 9 marriages was not bad luck, but bottomless ambition. Gabor always wanted to be on top. More money, more power, and more fame. When a husband could no longer provide benefits, she immediately left, looking for a new target. People whispered that Gabor once told a friend, "A man is only valuable if he can bring more than the one before." That ambition came with a streak of violence. In 1989, she slapped a Los Angeles police officer in the face during a traffic stop, a case that shocked the entire country. But in private, the violence was even worse. Some former maids recounted that she had a habit of throwing things when angry, from glass cups to ashtrays, at her husband or staff. The Tonight Show set witnessed terrifying scenes when Gabor lost her temper. If the dressing room wasn't exactly 74 degrees Fahrenheit, Or if the Perrier bottle on the table wasn't poured with exactly 3 ice cubes, she would lock the door, scream loudly, and force the entire crew to run all over Beverly Hills to buy the correct items. Once, just because a French foundation cream was missing, she threatened, "If I don't get it, I'll make this whole taping fall apart, and I swear." Carson will remember the name Zsa Gabor forever. Carson had to shake his head in admission. She turned the entire crew into slaves. I sat there knowing full well that everyone was being tormented just so a woman could appear perfect on screen. Jerry Lewis. In the memories of many Americans, Jerry Lewis was the crying man, a symbol of compassion as he organized telethons for children with muscular dystrophy. Every year, millions of viewers watched him wipe away tears, begging viewers to open their wallets to save the unfortunate. But Johnny Carson, who had to face Lewis in real life, said it directly at a party in Beverly Hills. That wasn't compassion. That was an act. When the camera was off, his true face emerged. That face was unbelievably cruel. On The Tonight Show, Lewis often interrupted Carson arbitrarily, turned his chair, and even bent over to adjust Carson's tie on air just to show his superiority. For a host as famous for his composure as Carson, that act was nothing short of public humiliation. Backstage was even more horrific. Lewis was known for treating the crew like dirt. Once, just because a cameraman was breathing a little too heavily while filming, he screamed, "You don't deserve to work here. You're just a parasite." The cameraman silently walked out, but the entire studio that day was filled with tense silence. Carson later recalled, he could turn a grown man into a humiliated child in just a few seconds. In his family, Lewis was even more ruthless. His 6 children, including Gary Lewis, who later became a singer, repeatedly accused their father of physical and emotional abuse. Gary wrote in his memoir, "My father never saw us as his children. He saw us as props to prove his image as the perfect father in the press." The children were reportedly forced to take family photos right after being beaten, having to force a smile for the camera while still covered in bruises. Lewis's hypocrisy was glaring. He cried for strangers' children on television, but abandoned his own children to live in misery. A former staff member who worked on the telethon crew recalled, "When the camera was on, he hugged a sick child and sobbed. But when the camera was off, he threw the tissue on the floor, cursed at the staff, and walked away without even bothering to say goodbye to the child."